welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a novel that is absolutely consuming my life, and that's a word chosen with intention for this book. It's an absolutely wild ride, and I am having a really great time, and I'm so excited to dig beneath the cover. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure, Jen, thanks for having me. I'm AP Thayer, and the book that Jen is talking about is my debut horror novel, Tapeworm. It's coming out with Zando's new horror imprint, Evil Twin. I'm very honored and blessed that I am their first novel that they're putting out.
It's very exciting to sort of be the flagship book of a press that sounds like it's going to do a lot of really cool things.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
this certainly sets the tone and I think sets a high bar to meet for, no pressure
Thank
to
you.
the later authors, but it's,
Yeah.
it's phenomenal. But before we talk about Tapeworm specifically, could you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about your career and your journey as a writer?
Sure. I've lived, I like to say I've lived many different lives in different industries and businesses. About 10 years ago, I finally told myself that I wanted to take a real crack at writing because it's something that I'd always wanted to do. And at various points in my life, I kind of made it like a half-hearted effort to go through with it. But finally, 10 years ago, I was like, all right, now let's get serious. Let's really get into it. I found an in-person writing group, which I'm super thankful for here in Los Angeles. And then since then, I've just been writing as often as I can, trying to get published, getting published. And I was able to get my first book deal about a year and a half ago.
Thanks. I know you've done some short fiction as well in a genre or space that you've referred to as nightmarism. I would love if you
Yes.
could talk about that term a little bit because I love it.
Sure, absolutely. I have I write a lot of like cross-genre stuff. And when it comes to my horror or horror adjacent writing, I kind of have gravitated toward a lot of the same themes. A lot of dream stuff, a lot of surrealism. I really love magical realism in literature and try and use that a little bit in my writing as well. And I call it nightmarism because I have hypnagogia, which is essentially sleep paralysis. It's that like waking state, half asleep, half awake. Some Most often, maybe not most often, but a lot of people experience it as sleep paralysis. For me, I experience it as really vivid hallucinations, and so I get a lot of ideas this way, and I also kind of in that feeling of half asleep, half awake. I like writing in that space as well, and sometimes hoping that the reader feels like they're half asleep and half awake. So that's why I called it nightmarism.
Nice. Yeah, that is certainly a feeling I had reading the book, and it's a feeling that the characters feel at times too in Tapeworm. Could you talk a little bit about that and some of your other interests? I read on your website that you like to also explore identity, folklore, Mexican American heritage, and third culture kid upbringing. Could you talk about the inception of this novel and how it relates to all those interests?
Sure, yeah. I grew up moving around a lot. My father was in the Foreign Service. I moved around all over Europe. My mother's Mexican, and she did her best to share her culture with me and kind of make sure that everything she had she could pass on to her kids. A lot of that was through cooking, and a lot of it was lost on me as a child, you know. It wasn't until I grew older that I really started to connect more with her and connect more with my heritage and really try and like find out who I was more instead of trying to like fit into what would work best in the location I was living in. Um, and it kind of, a lot of my childhood had this like untethered feeling to it. And I feel that like at least when I was getting towards middle age, I was getting some of those same feelings again. And talking to some of my friends and other people, just it seemed like kind of a common thing where you're not sure who you are, who you're supposed to be. The way you were raised kind of told you that success looks this way, and that doesn't really exist anymore. So when I was writing Tapeworm, I was taking all of these different feelings that I was having and exploring how different people would react to that kind of untethered feeling, especially the main character.
Yeah, Victor's a fascinating main character, and spending time in his head can be a pretty harrowing experience. It's a word that came up before we were recording, and it's going to
Yeah,
come up again
yeah,
now. Um, I'd love if you could talk about shaping his character and especially his inner monologue, because he's got a really nasty inner critic that uh pops up pretty frequently.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I've talked about this before in other places. Getting into Vic's head was uh, far more difficult and um, to borrow your word, harrowing for me when I was writing than it was to write the like body horror and the gore and all stuff. Because just like constantly being in that place of like self-doubt, lack of identity, arrogance, trauma, jealousy. It was just this really like dark place. A lot of those feelings are feelings that I've experienced or I've seen other people experience. And I just really wanted to turn all of that into 11 and really have someone get into the head of someone who's super insecure, who has this toxic voice inside of them that is both giving them this like God ego, but at the same time constantly undercutting them. And yeah, I hope people can relate to some of it at least. I know I can relate to that voice sometimes in myself. But if you're in there, take a break because it's being in Vic's head is a lot.
Yeah, I think it is. It's very relatable and something that it captures so well because Vic is basically like has just at the outset of the novel, his marriage is falling apart, has fallen apart very freshly, and he's on a group trip with friends. And being in his head and the way that he ping pongs between um this really like misanthropic arrogance and this like total vulnerability, complete honesty about himself, but also like a completely unnecessarily cruel voice. Like
Mhm.
it is a lot to take in, but it also feels so real to anybody who's ever gone through something that has like really uh, changed their views of themselves, you know?
Yeah, I was really hoping to capture the complexities of our own psyche when it comes to trauma and new trauma and how we identify ourselves based on factors that are outside of us. And when those change or disappear, it kind of leaves these holes.
What also feels really resonant and realistic is how Vic relates to the rest of the group on this trip because he's there without his wife, who's always been there, and his friends from, I guess, college and like early 20s are all relate to, you know, him in different ways about what's just happened in their marriage. And the way that his inner mind completely colors the way that he views like every social interaction that he's taking part of it's like it's so real, you know, the way that like when you are so upset and miserable, you just become so inside yourself about it and it makes you not be able to trust like those interactions.
Yeah, it's like a poison. I mean, it completely colors every interaction you have with anyone else. And instead of approaching people with grace and assuming, they're coming from a place of grace as well, you start undercutting them, you start mistrusting them. And then that toxic voice inside of you just kind of like nags you on.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about those group dynamics, the wider group of friends? There's a lot of really great characters in there, very vivid and nuanced. I'm curious about if you had ones that were your favorite to write or perhaps the most challenging. Could you talk about the supporting cast here, the ensemble?
Sure. I I when I started writing this book, it was a novella, and the characters were very kind of on the periphery of Vic's walk through life or through this story. As I got further along with writing them, I really wanted to focus on some of the experiences I've seen and had within relationships where, again, going back to that kind of like that poison, you view them a certain way, and that you view them that way for so long that you basically can't see them for how they've changed or grown. And the same thing can happen back to you. So when I was writing all of them, I kind of wanted to balance out, different vices, different virtues. Vic was the easiest one to write just because I was in the POV all the time, and the rest of them were a challenge because I was trying to filter that information, those characters, through his point of view. So I wanted to give the readers an accurate view of them while letting them know that some of that was being filtered through Vic and, um, you know, like Trish herself, his ex-wife. I really wanted there to be some people who a lot of the time were like, oh, she's done X, Y, and Z. That's horrible. And then kind of changed their mind a little bit as it went on. So yeah, I don't really have a favorite other than Vic just because it was easiest to write. Um, but I enjoyed writing all of them. I enjoyed really getting to know them.
Because they all have their own really complicated relationship dynamics as well. I was particularly fond of Charles and Diego because they have a sort of, classic like Bert and Ernie dynamic of, like
Yeah.
funny guy, straight guy, like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they were really fun to write. I, yeah, I feel, Diego, again, like getting into the headspace of all these characters, and talking about the virtues and vices. Diego for me was like anger, and so I really wanted to get into like what his repressed anger looked like and how it looked like when he could no longer repress it. So that's just kind of how I wanted to treat all the characters.
Yeah, because it's a really slow burn. You spend a lot of time hanging out like on vacation with this,
Yeah, basically.
and it really, I mean, it's great because it makes the emotional stakes that much more hit so much harder later on in the book, and you really feel like you know them, which is important when, not to reveal anything, but like when identity becomes, confusing.
Yeah,
But
for sure. Yeah.
um, and their really fleshed out personalities contribute to like a really suffocating sense of social horror. Like before you even introduce anything supernatural, like just the group dynamics are full of horror, like in and of
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in those situations, or I've observed those situations where it's just so tense all the time, and you're checking everything that you say, and you're second guessing everything everyone says, and it's just toxic. It's just not a good relationship.
It's a very particular thing to midlife as well, which I think you brought up early on, and I think the ages of all these characters is also pretty relevant. Um, that a friend group, can sort of go through relationship difficulties and a breakup, or it can sour and curdle without anybody really knowing what's happening, the same way that a relationship or a marriage can. I often, I think we often privilege like romantic relationships as the ones that are the most fulfilling or devastating on the flip side. But the breakup of a friend group can be just as, if not more, like life shifting.
I agree. I think a friendship breakup is harder than a romantic breakup. A friendship breakup is like, uh, when you enter a relationship with someone, it's like you're entering into a contract. A lot of time, friendships are just these things that like grew naturally, and then how do you like detangle yourself from someone like that? Um, so yeah, friendships are definitely tough.
Absolutely. Um, so I want to be as vague as possible
Sure.
about the more supernatural horror elements, and I'll let you sort of guide where we go. Um, I'd love to, in general, talk about your approach to horror because there are parts that are like, like what I like to say is that while I'm reading, like my whole body's a fist, like you're just like,
Sure,
um,
yeah.
and I'm really curious about how you negotiate um, what to show, what to suggest, and sort of what to entirely leave to the imagination when you are taking the reader through something that you want to be really visceral.
That's a good question. I guess the cheap answer is it feels instinctual to me, but I'll give you a better answer, I think. Um, I think luckily I've grown up reading and watching a lot of stories and a lot of just really great examples of tension and stress and anxiety. And I know how my body reacts to that kind of stuff. And so if I can make my body react a certain way, then I hope that I'm making the reader react the same way. And so if I'm very slowly writing something and I'm trying to build tension and like it's kind of vague and surreal, and then it comes to a point where I can really get into certain details and really slow time down. Um, that's what works for me, and so I hope that's what works for readers.
That's really interesting. I never really thought about that as sort of the manipulation of time, how long you
Yeah,
let a particular moment linger. That's really
yeah.
interesting. And also, sort of along those lines, this book does a lot with sort of mixing and confusing desire, erotic desire, sexual desire with horror and those sort of more off-putting transgressive elements. Can you talk
hmm
about like why are we so drawn to putting those things together? Like it's so fascinating and how you approach that.
Yeah, I think horror and eroticism can go hand in hand a lot of the time. Because you're really delving into like carnal and visceral reactions, and a lot of the times that kind of stuff just doesn't make sense. And attraction doesn't make sense all the time, and eroticism doesn't make sense. So having that line where like just on one side you're like cringing and feeling disgusting, but then if you push it the other side it's like, oh, something's happening here, maybe you're like, what's going on? um I mostly like doing it because it keeps people on their toes. Having someone or giving someone confusing feelings for me is just delightful.
It is. And they do both like sort of deal with the negotiation of as you say, like a loss of bodily autonomy. Like so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
experience losing control a little bit of your body, um,
hmm
in totally
And in one
different.
way it's good, and in another way it's really bad.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that plays really nicely into the use of dream space too, because there are a lot of there are some like really vivid dreams depicted.
Mhm.
And they also play with that. Like I think so many of our dreams do play with like putting really confusing feelings together
Yeah,
just to see
absolutely.
what that reveals about us. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I know this has happened to me. I won't speak to everyone else, but there's definitely times where I've woken up from a dream and the emotions that I felt in my dream felt way more real than the emotions I feel day to day. And I have to like shake it off of myself. I spent half the morning just in this mood, all because I dreamt something.
Yeah, I've been mad at people for hours upon waking and before I realized that they didn't actually do anything
Yep,
to me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is next for you? Are you writing right now?
I am writing right now. I actually have 6 days left on my deadline.
Ooh.
Yeah. I am working on the next book with Evil Twin. It was announced with the official announcement. It's called Sorrow Lake. It's going to be a different kind of story. I guess I can't tease too much about that one, but I'm currently working on it. I'm enjoying it very much. It's something that's been in the works for a couple years now, but in the last 6 months, it's really like narrowed down into something um, that I think should be fun.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to that. And thank you for coming to talk to us about this book, especially with your deadline looming. I know your time's very valuable right now.
No,
So,
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
oh, you're so welcome. And listeners, thank you for joining us. Please check out Tapeworm. When you hear this, it will be out in the world, so you could head to your favorite bookstore or library, website, wherever you like to go for your books. Do you have a favorite, perhaps local or place or bookstore that you like to send folks for books?
Online, I always go to bookshop.org. Either I go there or I go to Thrifty Books. And if you're in the LA area, I know that the Last Bookstores will carry it, Skylight, Book Soup, just a whole bunch of places.
LA's a great bookstore city, I think. Sort of that gets
It is.
that sort of falls below the surface of like other things it's known better for, but
Sure,
yeah,
yeah. But
really
we are
good.
definitely spoiled for choice here for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. And thank you again, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.